Okay. Hey, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore. And I'm actually broadcasting here in Scottsdale, Arizona at the bookstore itself. And Lesa Holstine is joining us. She's going to be conducting the program here. And she's been with us for a long time, used to live here in Arizona. Now she's banished to the hinterlands of Evansville, Indiana, where she works at the Vanderburg Public Library. But Lesa has been a wonderful asset to the store from afar. She does our Poison Pen blog, and hopefully we're going to lure her back to the mothership here in Arizona at some point. But so welcome, Lesa. Thanks so much for helping us out and doing this. And also with us is Sarah Stewart Taylor, joining us from Vermont. And she has a brand new book called The Mountains Wild, set largely in Ireland. And Lesa is going to be conducting the program here. So welcome, Sarah. And I will largely be in the background. So you guys have a lot of fun. And I'll slip away here.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, you're the author of the Sweeney St. George series, but the last one of those was about 14 years ago.
That's right.
Where have you been for 14 years?
Well, I feel like I should come up with some really interesting story about, that I was in fact working for the CIA, and I've been abroad going on missions, and in fact, the truth is much less romantic and mysterious. So right around the time the last Sweeney was published in 2006, I think, 2006 or 2007, I had my first child in there. And so I sort of wrote that last book with an infant, and then had two more children in pretty quickly there. And I found it very difficult to write for a few years there, and kind of got out of the book a year schedule that so many mystery writers are able to keep up. And it was interesting sort of how I've come back to it. I loved introducing books to my kids. One of my favorite parts of those early years of parenting was reading to my kids, reading with my kids, seeing my kids become readers. And as part of that process, I think I discovered books again, even for myself. And I started writing books for middle grade readers. And so in those years, I wrote an adventure series for middle grade readers. There were 3 of those in the series, and I loved doing that. I loved going to schools and talking to groups of kids about writing and about books, and I just loved it. But I really missed crime fiction, and I really missed constructing mysteries. And finally, probably about 3 years ago, I felt like I had the space and the time, and I sort of had it's hard to describe. Ideas just started sort of coming into my head again, and I started working on The Mountains Wild.
Okay, I've read The Mountains Wild twice. Love this book. There's so much I could ask you about it. I'm going to start with setting, because I normally read for character. And it isn't often that I fall in love with the setting of a book. In 2002, Jonathan King had an Edgar Award-winning book called The Blue Edge of Midnight. Took place in the Florida Everglades. That's the last time I remember something as vivid as the settings in The Mountains Wild. So, you're Ireland, 2 different time periods. Ireland really becomes a character. So tell us about Ireland in The Mountains Wild.
Yeah, so as you say, the book unfolds in two different time periods, 1993 and 2016. And I right after I graduated from college in 1993, I moved to Ireland and ended up living there for a few years, working and doing some different things, and then eventually going to graduate school and getting my master's in Irish literature while I was there. And so, I think that early time period, what Dublin was like in 1993, what I traveled a lot during those years. So what other parts of Ireland that I visited were like in 1993, came very directly from my memory. And it was interesting because those were years that were really important to me, and I think important to who I've become, and years I just loved living there. I just loved everything about Ireland and about living there. And so it was, that setting was so vivid. And then in, around 2013, I started visiting more frequently again. And I was struck by how much Ireland had changed and how much it hadn't too. There were essential things that were kind of the things that I had loved about it. The sense of community and conversation being so important, and a real like passionate attachment to a certain kind of spending time with your friends, and the importance of conversation and talking about ideas, and joking, and just there's just sort of a there's this way of interacting with friends that is so essential and is still absolutely there. But then there were other things that had changed so much. Dublin had, in the years since I've lived there, Dublin has become an international business center, and Facebook and Google and all these companies have their European headquarters there, and there's a lot of money has poured into the city, and the amount of building and construction and development has brought some really interesting and complicated changes to Dublin, and to a lesser extent, other cities have seen it as well, and even small towns. So I sort of had those, I think the two time periods were definitely part of my constructing the settings for this book. And I wanted to get across just the absolute gorgeousness of the country. It really is just one of the most beautiful places. The mountains and the coastline and the inland agricultural land, and it's just a gorgeous place. And I also didn't want to sort of romanticize it too much or make it too cutesy. I think there are some treatments of Ireland that end up being very kind of twee, and I knew I didn't want to go there. I wanted it to feel, complete. So does that answer your question about the settings?
It does, but I'm then going to ask you a little bit about Long Island. It's not
Sure.
Major in this book, but I have the feeling it may have a larger role in the next one. So Long Island.
Yeah, so I grew up on Long Island. I grew up in a town called Huntington on the North Shore. And, the thing, Long Island is defined by the ocean. It's on the South Shore, it's the big ocean, and on the North Shore, it's Long Island Sound. And, it was interesting because my family, a lot of my friends, their families had boats, or they were lobstermen, or, they did clamming, and it was a big part of their life. And we didn't. My family, my parents were both teachers, and we would actually rent out our house on Long Island in the summer and come up here to New England where my dad's family lived. And so we sort of, missed out on a lot of that the just sort of beach culture of Long Island, which is a huge part of growing up there. And I think in a lot of ways, this book was my attempt to sort of go back and try to kind of vicariously through Maggie live some of that, because she has more of a traditional kind of Long Island upbringing than I did in that sense. So there's a lot of beach and ocean and of course the legacy of Irish Americans on Long Island is very important to this book. And I think, Maggie is always looking across the Atlantic, as so many Irish Americans on Long Island do. And, in a lot of ways, I think this book is about Irish Americans thinking they know a place that is so much a part of their identity and finding out they really don't, and finding out just sort of how much they've misunderstood. So I think the Long Island setting is a big part of that.
So now you get to introduce Maggie Darcy and her cousin Erin to us.
Sure. So Maggie Darcy is a recent college graduate in 1993. She's living on Long Island and working at her uncle's bar. And her cousin Erin, who's a year older, has always been sort of the wild one, the unpredictable one, the beautiful one, the one who Maggie kind of has always defined herself against, in a way, that she, Maggie has always seen herself as being really different from Erin, and everyone else has always seen them as being very different. And Erin, sort of in the latest in a long string of what seemed like impulsive decisions, moved to Ireland about a year before the book starts. And so when the 1993 section starts, Maggie is working in her uncle's bar, and they get a call that Erin has disappeared in Dublin. She hasn't come home to the place where she's living. And so Maggie goes over to see if she can help. Erin's father isn't well, and Maggie's mother has died fairly recently, and so Maggie's father isn't able to go look for his niece. And so Maggie goes, and she tries to trace Erin's sort of last weeks, and she tries to find out what happened to her. And in the process of doing this, she's trying to get to know Erin. She realizes how little she actually knows about her, and that she's kind of putting together all these different impressions and reports about Erin's behavior, and she just can't make sense of it. She can't come up with a picture of who Erin really was and what might have happened to her. And ultimately she has to go home. She doesn't find any trace of Erin, and the family has to live with this uncertainty. And then 23 years later, new evidence is found, and Maggie, who has become a homicide detective now, largely because of her experience with the investigation into Erin's disappearance, has to go back to Ireland and see if she can finally solve this case.
That's what I was going to ask you. In some ways, Erin, both when she lived with Maggie's parents, family, and then her disappearance, sort of changed the whole direction of Maggie's life.
Yes.
How much backstory do you know about where Maggie might have ended up and what she would have happened to her if Erin hadn't disappeared?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because for me, that's one of the real kind of hearts of this book for me. I think the book started in a way with me thinking about the families of people who disappear, and what that's like, and how it changes. It changes everything. It changes the course of many of those family members' lives. And part of my original conception of Maggie was exactly what you just said, that she would have had, the course of her life was changed by this disappearance and by her inability to find Aaron, when she first goes over. And so in my mind, Maggie probably would, and she talks about this a little bit, she probably would have become an academic. She might have, studied, she was studying Irish literature and Irish studies. And she might have become an academic. She might have become a reporter. But she doesn't, because of this event. And as it turns out, she's a very good detective. And some of those skills that she uses as a young woman to try to find Aaron are the exact skills she will use when she trains to become a homicide detective.
I'm going to read a quote to you from the book and then ask a question I haven't heard you answer yet.
Okay.
The quote is, "On some level, all of us have been stuck back there in the mountains. Me, Raleigh, Uncle Danny, Jessica, Amer and Daisy, probably even Connor and Laura, and Brian and Lily. My question is, do you see Maggie as a victim?"
Oh, that's such a good question. In a certain sense, I do. I think that I have to be very careful not to give anything away. But in a certain sense, I do. I think that she and Aaron are both victims of the same kind of the same kind of evil, if you will. And they're victims in different ways. They're sort of victimized by what happened in different ways. But I do think that by the end of the novel, Maggie has taken that experience and kind of turned it so that she's no longer a victim, both in solving the mystery. I think that's probably the primary way that she's been stuck in those mountains all this time, and she would have continued to be. But by solving the mystery, she turns it, and she kind of, shakes off that victimhood. But that's a really interesting question.
Well, I was thinking about it because what we haven't talked about yet is Erin was just the first woman to go missing.
Right.
And the families of those missing people.
Yep.
And that's sort of how I wondered if you saw Maggie and her extended family as all victims of whatever crime, or in Erin's case, we don't know if it was a crime, right. When they're searching for her. But whether or not all of those people are victims.
Yeah, I think there's a reason that we, that we've started to offer support to the families of crime victims, and to kind of recognize, I think it's a more recent thing, but I think we do now recognize how impactful losing a family member to, either a disappearance under suspicious circumstances, however that's resolved, or to something that may end up, being recognized as a violent crime. I think we're starting to understand just how many ripples that causes for the families of crime victims.
Mm-hmm. Okay, on a little bit different, because like you, I don't want to have spoilers and ruin this book for other people. You actually have 3 different time periods. We talk about 1993 and then 2016, but there are memories that Maggie has when she talks about their childhood. talk a little bit, if you would, about trying to keep everything straight and to write 3 different time periods in this book.
Yes. So there are these kind of, I think of them as more sort of impressionistic. They're not, Maggie hasn't made sense of them yet. They're like little snippets of memory. And as she's looking for Aaron, she's trying, like, pulling everything out of her memory bank that she can to try to use them as clues to try to figure out what happened to Aaron. And I really, I liked the idea of, that our memories of people are so, they're so subjective, and we think we understand someone we love because we have all of these memories of them, and we kind of put them together to form a picture. And yet some of those memories may be wrong. We may not have remembered correctly. We're missing some crucial memories. And so the picture we create is not very complete and often not very accurate. And so I knew I wanted those little sort of impressionistic memories to kind of form, to sort of make more sense as you went along and had more information and started to be able to put it all together for Maggie and for the reader. And then I have the 1993 and the 2016, and I think the hardest thing about this book was getting that all in the right order. And I have to give my editor, Kelly Ragland, a huge amount of credit for kind of helping me to think about that. And just to get that right, that was tricky, because you don't want to, you have one timeline developing, and you don't want to give something away that will then take away from the other timeline. And it was very tricky, but I love books that do that. And so I knew I wanted to try.
Well, you did a great job. I don't know about other people who have read it or will read it, but everything flowed beautifully. It wasn't jarring to go from one time period to another. I know some readers say they don't like it, but it didn't. It flowed beautifully in The Mountains Wild. I didn't really notice, you knew which time period it was, and it wasn't a struggle to try to figure out where you were.
Well, thank you. Good. That's good to hear.
So what you said about memory, that leads to a comment you made in an interview about the conversations that we don't have. With people we love, with family members. Talk about that a little bit, but about that statement that we don't have conversations.
Yeah.
Or conversations we don't have.
So I think, especially as I've gotten older, I think I've become so conscious of those questions about your parents' childhood, your grandparents' childhoods, about the events that made them who they are. And I think there are stories that are told, and we get to hear the positive stories, and the funny stories, and the stories that people like to tell. But I think I've become aware too of how much gets left out, and how, the questions that we don't ask. And, I think I've had a few, not with immediate family members, but with sort of extended family and family, family members of friends in particular, where there were these real secrets and things that just had been hidden and had not been talked about. And yet, if you looked back, the person kind of would say to themselves, like, I knew there was something there, and I just never asked the right question. I was scared to go there. I was afraid to ask that question. Like, whenever a certain topic of conversation came up, this person's face kind of clouded over, and I should have asked. I should have asked why. And of course, there's so many reasons that we don't want to invade people's privacy. It's hard to have those conversations where you go to dark places. And so I think more often than not, we don't ask the questions that would kind of give us a complete picture of that person, or for that person to make sense. And so yeah, that was one of the things that really drove the characters in this novel, was that sense of the questions we don't ask.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting as a reader to say this, have this next question, because I don't know if the writer ever thinks these things. You know, it's what we read into it, and it may not even be what you thought. So I saw The Mountains Wild as a story of family. It was a cold case,
Yeah.
and it was a police procedural. So can you talk a little bit about family and the importance of it in this without spoilers?
Yeah.
Um, because there's so much as to the reasons Maggie goes to Ireland, and
Yep.
and you know, so if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think family, definitely family was part of the, as I thought of sort of the whole picture of this novel, that this family, the Maggie's uncle Danny and Aaron and Maggie's parents, that family unit was really, really important. And there's a missing person in that family unit. Aaron's mother, who was Irish, disappeared shortly after Aaron was born. And so that, that's part of the search that Maggie is on. She's not just looking for Aaron, but she's trying to figure out if that had anything to do with Aaron's disappearance, and to try to find this missing woman. And so there's kind of, the echoes of disappearance are there in this family. And I think too that Maggie and Aaron are both only children, and so they're cousins, but they grow up more like sisters, and that bond is tested even in their childhood. Maggie feels that Aaron was cruel to her at different points in their childhood. She was a very volatile person, and so there's this. It's very complicated between them, but there's also this bond that Maggie just has to find out what happened to her, and she needs to, for her own developing identity. And there's a way in which, until she solves this mystery, she can't really become a whole person, and she can't see things about her own life very clearly, because this mystery has kind of taken over her adult life in a way. So yeah, and I wanted to play too with surrogate parent figures, I think. And Uncle Danny is a little bit of a surrogate parent to Maggie. He's lost his daughter. She's she becomes a surrogate daughter for him.
He's working in the bar or the
That's
pub,
right.
so yes.
Yep. Yeah.
You've sort of touched on this, and so this one might not take much, because when we talked about time frames, talk about writing a cold case right along with the current investigation.
Yeah. So the cold case was there originally. That was part of my original conception of the book.
Okay.
And it wasn't, though, until I figured out that there would be a new woman missing, and that that Maggie's ability to solve the cold case might in fact save another woman's life. It wasn't until I sort of figured that out that the novel really clicked into place for me, because I think I absolutely love cold case novels. I mean, they're one of, like, I love them. But there always is this little bit of a sense of, where's the urgency? Why does it matter? And so once I figured out, yes, there's another woman missing, and Maggie may be able to help save her if she can figure out what happened to Aaron. That gave me that urgency that I needed. And I could, it was amazing. Like, I could just feel the manuscript sort of pick up energy and steam at that point, once that was there.
So I'm going to ask um, because of the police procedural aspect, um, what you've been researching or how you've been researching the difference between the Suffolk County Police Department that Maggie works for and the Garda, or the Irish police guards. So research and how you did that.
Yep. Yeah. So I needed to do a lot of research for this book because as you say, there are these two different models of policing and of homicide investigation, and they're very different, and they're very different sort of on the ground, the way a criminal investigation starts and proceeds. And so it was really important to understand that. So I did a lot of online research, just just following the Garda on Facebook and reading articles about the way it operates. But then I did speak to some members of the Garda, and that was incredibly helpful. And just so I think it's really necessary when you're writing a police procedural to have some conversations with people who have been there and who've done that work. And they were great because they answered questions, and they also sort of told me when I was pushing it a little far. And I think all mystery writers have had this experience of, you have a plot in mind and then you talk to the experts, and the experts say, that would, you can't do that. It would never happen that way. And you sort of have to go back and rethink, and and eventually you hopefully you come to a place that both feels realistic and that works for your story. And sometimes that's it's not 100% realistic, and it's not 100% where you would have liked to take your story, but you kind of find a happy medium. And in fact, I found that a lot of the research I did helped to really helped to add some tension to the plot. I think, initially I had Maggie just, going over to Ireland, and her old friend Rolly says, "Oh yeah, come along. We'll do some investigation." And once I'd spoken to somebody who knew, and this person said, "Yeah, that breaks so many regulations, and there's no way that that a guarded detective is going to let this random American just ride along." I had to sort of reimagine that relationship, and I had to reimagine Maggie's access to the investigation. And it created a lot more tension, because she has to kind of go around him a little bit, and he's someone she really cares about, and she risks his job that he loves. And so it ended up adding a lot, doing that research. And it was just a good lesson that you've got to go and talk to the people who know, and but it was interesting because the Garda had undergone a huge reorganization during, between the time that I had lived in Ireland and then, when I was writing about 2016. So the way that crimes are investigated now is different from how they were investigated in 1993. And there's now a national, criminal investigation bureau and labs that are a little more centralized. And there are just some differences in sort of jurisdiction and the organizational structures. So that was really important to understand that and how that looked.
And you sort of put that in the book, that it had changed from 1993 to 2016.
Yeah.
Okay, before I start asking some questions that aren't directly related to the book, what have I missed that you want to tell us, or is there nothing else you want to tell us about the book without giving anything away?
Oh wow, you have asked such good questions. I think you really have hit on all of the all the things that I sort of like to talk about. I think you've done a great job hitting all the points.
Okay, because I've read The Mountains Wild twice, I will tell you that every time I read it, I go back and read Yeats's poem Easter 1916.
Mhm.
um, so talk a little bit about literature and history in the book and in Ireland. And you did mention it somewhat when you were talking about the culture at the beginning.
Yeah. So it's interesting because the appearance of that poem, Maggie is looking at, I'm trying to remember exactly when it appears. Is it when she's in the bar, or is it when she's walking down? She's walking in front of the
Yeah,
post office.
yeah.
So yeah,
And
so
I've
she,
been there, correct.
that's right. Now it's coming back. So she she's walking around Dublin, and she's, and the thing about Dublin is that, there's history everywhere, and you walk past buildings, and these are the buildings where incredibly historic things happened. And she's walking through a part of the city that was, that was very important during the 1916 rebellion, and she's thinking of that poem. And I wanted, because she had studied Irish literature and Irish history in college, she sort of has this idea, she has these lines of poetry in her head. And she gets to Dublin, and she sees the building, but I think the next line is something about the McDonald's, and the music that's playing on a loudspeaker coming out of a store that sells,
Something you
like, right, exactly, that sells like trendy, club clothes or something. And so I really wanted that. Again, I wanted that sense of like, this is an American coming to Ireland for the first time, and she has these lines of poetry in her head, and she has this idea about, sort of, she's romanticizing the politics, which are very complicated. And she's getting kind of, in a sense, she's getting like smacked in the face a little bit with, no, this is a real place. This isn't a museum. This is a city where people live, and where, where history is always here. And yet it's a city just like any other city, where people are, eating fast food, and and going out clubbing. And so I liked that. I liked that as a way to kind of introduce her, in some ways, her ignorance, and her ideas about things. So yeah, and then I think there's maybe is another Yeats poem in the book on the wall of her uncle's bar. And I thought that was, I sort of wanted, that's something you see on the walls of lots of Irish American bars. You'll see these sort of like just random snippets of Irish poetry. And I've always been fascinated by that. And I think for some people it's a real touchstone, and for other people it's just like, okay, it's the obligatory Yeats on the bar wall, And so I was sort of like exploring that a little bit too.
So politics. Not going to talk about the politics. I'm going to talk about current politics. COVID-19 has sort of put Brexit on a back seat. And there's parts of the book where you talk about Northern Ireland, and of course the Troubles, and she and Raleigh go over to Northern Ireland, which I'm not giving anything away by just saying they make a trip to Northern Ireland. What do you think is going to happen with the border?
Oh God, I mean, I would not,
Oh,
I would not offer at this point. I think the lesson of 2020 for all of us is that trying to predict anything that's going to happen is a fool's errand. I mean, I think it's interesting because the book, I was finishing up the book, and the 2016 section is just before the Brexit vote, and also the 2016 election in the United States. And so as I was finishing it after those events had already occurred, I kept having this urge to kind of add more and kind of go back and add more detail and context. And I realized that I needed not to do that, that I was writing about this moment in time right before these two huge things happened. And the characters in the book don't know that they're about to happen. And so the conversation about Brexit is very, it's very sort of understated. It's just, some people say that if this happens, the border may come back. And I think I just wanted, all of my conversations with my friends in Ireland around that time was just, people just wanted the rest of the UK, certainly, but also the rest of the world to understand, just how devastating it would be to have a hard border come back and kind of return to those times. And I think that was just sort of what I was trying to convey. It was like, the characters who had lived through, had lived through the Troubles, most of them, and they, Brexit was very concerning in that regard. Now, of course, since then, they've come to some agreements. It seems like they're, it's a little unclear exactly what's going to happen with Brexit now. It's all a bit up in the air again, it seems like, but that there will not be a hard border, which is good news. But it's all, things have shifted a lot, and I'm glad that I put 2016 at the top of those chapters, because I think if I just said present day, or if I, things have, feelings about a lot of this stuff have shifted very, very quickly since 2016. And, I think some of what I wrote would not be accurate if I was trying to say it happened in 2020. So, yeah, it's really, really interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard to believe that the book itself, the 2016 part, only takes place in just 2 weeks.
Right.
And then, and later on, but the action only takes place in 2 weeks, because it feels like there's so much there. There's so much meat and so much action, really, in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
The question that I'm sure readers will want to know is, I think you're writing on a sequel, another book in the series.
Yep.
Can you tell us anything other than Maggie's back?
So Maggie is back, and it's really hard to talk about the second book as I'm promoting the first book, because I even just sort of saying where it's set, gives something away. And so, but I will say that I'm finishing it up, and I've really enjoyed writing this book, because I see this book as kind of a celebration of Maggie's skills as a detective. And she, in many ways, throughout this book, she's dealing with the fallout of the first book. And so things in her kind of personal world are a bit of a shambles, but in her job, she is, I just wanted to kind of show her really at the height of her powers in a way. And that's been really fun, to just kind of take this woman detective and put her in her own world that has traditionally been a man's world, and in some other traditionally male worlds, and just show her really like just excelling. So that I will say that about it. And it's been really fun to get back to her, and I loved sort of envisioning what her next move would be.
Hey, just wanted to jump back in real quick. We've had some people kind of watching this great discussion on Facebook. And one of the questions I had, which I think you've kind of partly covered, is David asks, did the location itself come first, or did the character come first when you were conceiving of this book?
Absolutely. The location was that it all came from the location. the there was actually, very tragically, a series of real life disappearances in Ireland in the 90s that sort of served as the I suppose the inspiration is a terrible word for something so awful and sad, but it was sort of those cases were kind of where I started, and then needed to find a way to do a purely fictional version of it. And that's, I think, where then Maggie came in. And it was about, I knew I didn't want to and couldn't really write this from the point of view of an Irish investigator or an Irish family member. And so it was once I came up with the idea of an American investigator in Ireland that I sort of felt like, okay, that's the story that I can write. That's an experience I understand, and I can write that story.
You talked a little bit kind of at the beginning about just the tremendous changes that have occurred in Ireland in the last 20 years, 25 years. The whole, the rise of the Celtic Tiger period in Ireland, this new prosperity that, it's funny. I think it was, it may have been John Connolly when he was here. He always kind of pokes fun at, Americans, like you referred to earlier, romanticizing Ireland to death, and it's funny from his perspective. He writes most of his books set here in the United States, but he made a funny joke about just how the Irish aren't good with money, and they had that period of prosperity, and then just the boom and bust cycle. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think the 2007, 8, 9 downturn that we all experienced. Of course, it was a global downturn, and it hit Ireland really hard for a bunch of different reasons. But and I think it's interesting when I talk to Irish friends about that period. There is a real there's real trauma still associated with that. I think there were people who there were a lot of people who lost everything, who are still recovering from that period. Although the Irish economy has bounced back, really quite remarkably. But I think like all of our all of our societies, there's real. My Irish friends talk a lot about just the real inequity in Irish society, that there are Facebook and Google billionaires who are making a lot of money. And then there are people who have been left out of that prosperity. And I think obviously it's something that we see very intensely in our country right now. And I think it's something that a lot of countries are kind of grappling with and trying to figure out.
Yeah. When were you over there?
So I lived there from 1993 to 1996, about. And so that was a period where a lot of the foreign investment was just starting. And it was really interesting. I had some friends who kind of were in on some early, I had one friend who in like 1995 got a job with Microsoft. They had established an office in Dublin, and everybody, all of our Irish friends were just like, Microsoft, how, what's that about? And then it really started to come very quickly, and it transformed a lot of aspects of the economy and of Irish life, I think people would say.
It's funny, and then I'll turn it over to Lesa for some final questions or thoughts. I was there in 1999 for 3 weeks, and perhaps like you, it was very enamored with Irish literature at the time, and just obsessed, steeped in the whole thing, and still am to a certain degree. Gone through phases of recently read some Flann O'Brien again. Loved that. But for such a small country, it's amazing. You pick up the Sunday Irish Times, and their devotion to arts and literature is just unbelievable, you
It
know.
is.
And
Yeah.
and one thing, they still had the Irish currency there at the time. I think they've done away with it now. They're on the euro.
Yeah, they're on the euro now. Yeah, you know that. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I just love so much about the country. They're, you know, they do real public investment in the arts. They pay, you know, and I know, I'm sure that there are people who are going to say no, that, you know, the government's ending a lot of that and it's not as good as it used to be. And but compared to compared to the United States, there's you know, I think there's real support, um, and resources put behind, artists and the arts. And I also just think, you know, I just think that the that Irish writers are just use the English language at a different level than the rest of us do. I always think of it that they get more out of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we use like 30% of what's possible, and they're using a much greater percentage. And there are all kinds of fun reasons for that. I think one of them that I'm really interested in, I'm an Irish language learner now, and I'm learning Irish, and the sort of the influence of the Irish language on Hiberno English is it's really interesting, and kind of the, you know, constructions and words that come over, and it just, yeah, it's just, I just think Irish literature is, you know, it's just so full of energy and life and possibility.
Do you see there a strong connection between, you know, you were talking about the language, the richness of the language, and the uniqueness of the language? Do you see that you could draw a parallel between that and, you know, and some of the Southern writers here in the United States that have a, you know, a very strong Celtic influence and component to the language and certainly the music, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. I'm sure, you know, I'd have to do some more thinking about specific writers, but I know, yeah, I know there are some interesting parallels there that, and certainly the influence of Scots, Gaelic, and Irish on sort of Southern vernacular.
Yep.
So yeah, maybe we could like write a thesis about it, and we'll get some experts to come in and talk about that.
That would appeal to about 10 of us Irish
Right.
literature nerds around the country, probably. Well, this has been a really great discussion. Thanks, both of you. Lesa, did you have any? I don't really have any other questions. We have a lot of people that are chiming in and enjoying the discussion. But Lesa, did you have any kind of final thoughts or?
Well, actually, mine goes hand in hand with the fact that I do distractions on the blog and ask people what they're reading. Um, so, actually, Sarah, what I want to know is what Irish crime fiction writers you read.
Oh, great question. So, I really like, one of my sort of big discoveries of the past year or so. I've discovered some great women Irish crime writers. Dervla McTiernan is someone whose books I really like. Those are set in Ireland, sort of Galway. I love Galway, so I love reading her descriptions of the Galway area. There's a writer named Olivia Kiernan who writes a great series that's more sort of Dublin set. Let's see. I really liked Catherine Ryan Howard's first mystery, and well, actually it wasn't her first, but it was her first one set in Dublin at a fictional college in Dublin. And she has another one that I'm really excited to read. Jo Spain is another Irish woman crime writer who's writing some great stuff. And then let's see, there are lots of great male Irish crime writers too. I love, there's a writer named Brian McGilloway who writes a great series sort of set on right on the border. His detective is on the Irish side of the border, but frequently has to go over the border to investigate crimes, and has an interesting relationship with the police on the other side of the border. Those are really good. yeah, there's so many. I actually recently did a blog entry where I wrote about like, some of my favorite Irish crime writers, and there were a lot of them to include.
So that was really it. I wanted to know what you're reading as to, what people should be looking for if they like Irish crime fiction, besides The Mountains Wild, because they have to read that this year.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Lesa, for your wonderful support, and your questions were just fantastic. And Patrick, thank you for having us. And this was really fun.
Yeah, it's fun to be able to do this, right now with us in completely different parts of the country.
Yeah.
We're able to do this. It's a lot of fun. And Lesa, beware, we're going to be enlisting you for more of these.
That's great. She did a great job.
Yeah, she always does.
I'm passionate about that book. That one made a difference too.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But again, thank you very much, and appreciate you taking the time, both of you, out of your schedules to do this. It was a lot of fun. And congratulations on the publication of The Mountains Wild. I'll do my little brief commercial plug, which is we do have a small number of autographed copies of The Mountains Wild here at the Poison Pen. So if you'd like one, don't delay. They will be gone soon. So anyway, sláinte, you guys. Great to see you both, and have a wonderful evening.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody that's watching on Facebook. Take care. And